Aston, Birmingham, England, 1968. Guitarist Tony Iommi and drummer Bill Ward were looking to start a new band after their old one, Mythology, broke up. After visiting a local music shop, Iommi notices an ad that simply reads, "Ozzy Zig needs gig, has own PA." Impressed that this Ozzy fella has his own PA, Iommi gives him a call. After Ozzy Osbourne showed up for rehearsal, however, Iommi is a bit embarrassed to find out that he's one of their classmates at school. Around the same time, Iommi and Ward also recruit another classmate named Terrence Michael Joseph Butler. Well, his friends called him Geezer. Ozzy was a singer, Geezer was a bassist who also wrote lyrics. The two had already been in a band together called Rare Breed, by the way. The four recruited two more members, Jimmy Phillips, who played steel guitar, and Alan Clark, who played, wait for it, saxophone. But Phillips and Clark didn't stick around long. Iommi, Ward, Osbourne, and Butler pressed on, though, creating original songs and calling themselves the Polka Tulk Blues Band. Indeed, they were influenced by blues bands, but also were not afraid to experiment with their sound. Soon they were calling themselves just Polka Tulk, and then Earth, and began touring all across the United Kingdom. In December 1968, Iommi suddenly left the band after getting the opportunity to join Jethro Tull. Even though Jethro Tull was a rising band, Iommi didn't like the direction they were going, and within a few months he was back to Earth, the band. At some point in 1969, Butler came up with an idea for a song inspired by what he referred to as a, quote, figure from the dark side at the foot of his bed one night. Osbourne dug the idea and came up with lyrics, and soon that turned into a song called Black Sabbath, named after a horror film by Boris Karloff. After that, the band embraced the horror, having a much more dark, ominous, brooding, and haunting sound in all of their songs. They downtuned their guitars. Other bands didn't have this sound, and fans began to notice. One of those fans was a dude named Jim Simpson, a musician, producer, and promoter who had recently started a club called Henry's Blue House. Simpson waived his usual fee to have Earth play his club, and soon offered to manage Earth. But as it turns out, there was another Earth. As in, another band called Earth. After a club accidentally booked Iommi, Ward, Osbourne, and Butler because they thought they were the other Earth, who sounded nothing like them, by the way, the boys decided it was time for another band name change. Since their song, Black Sabbath, marked the beginning of their truly unique sound, from this point on, the band name was that, Black Sabbath. Their first show as Black Sabbath was August 30th, 1969, in Workington, England. Soon, Black Sabbath set out to record their first album, which they hoped to be essentially the musical equivalent of a horror film. Jim Simpson hooked them up with £1,000 to do just that, and the band recorded it in one day, on October 16th, 1969. Roger Bain, who also worked with fellow Birmingham rockers Judas Priest, produced it. Simpson sent the album to various record labels, and Phillips Records signed them the next month. One of their subsidiaries, Vertigo Records, released their self-titled debut studio album on February 13th, 1970. Today, many call it the first heavy metal album to ever exist. What's heavy metal, you ask? Well, a genre of rock music that's loud, harsh, has a strong beat, and often brings violent or dark imagery to the mind when you listen to it. Along with Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple, Black Sabbath basically created heavy metal. The album began with their aforementioned song, Black Sabbath, which music historians today often call the first doom metal song. Critics generally hated the album, but soon thousands were buying it anyway. It eventually get as high as number 8 on the UK albums chart and number 23 on the US Billboard 200. The band quickly returned to to the studio to record a Vietnam War protest song called War Pigs. Bain returned to produce. These new songs had different tempos and more cool guitar solos by Iommi. While in the studio, they literally ran out of songs to make a full album. But Iommi started playing a cool guitar riff that ended up being the beginnings of the song Paranoid, which, as it turns out, would be the lead single off the album. In fact, despite throwing the song together at the last minute, Black Sabbath named their entire second studio album after it. Vertigo released Paranoid on September 18th, 1970. Warner Brothers Records later released it in the United States. It was a huge hit, eventually reaching number 1 on the UK albums chart. Even today, it remains Black Sabbath's best-selling album, selling more than 12 million copies worldwide. Also, both radio stations and critics now suddenly were more favorable towards the band's music. Paranoid got all the way up to number 4 on the UK singles chart and number 61 on the US Billboard Hot 100. Another big hit off Paranoid was Iron Man, which today arguably remains their most recognizable song. It eventually peaked at number 52 on the Billboard Hot 100. The band's two notable anti-Vietnam War songs, the aforementioned War Pigs and Hand of Doom, also became big hits with fans. With Paranoid, Black Sabbath and the entire genre of heavy metal had entered the mainstream. Today, it's considered one of the greatest albums of all time. The band toured outside of the UK for the first time to support it, playing shows all over Europe, North America, and Australia. The grind of that tour is when the band started regularly doing heavy drugs, from cocaine to Quaaludes. Black Sabbath returned to the studio in February 1971. They took more time to record what would become their third studio album, Master of Reality, but still, Vertigo released it less than a year after their previous album, on July 21st, 1971. Bain produced again, and most of these songs were even heavier than their earlier work. That said, Iommi busted out the acoustic guitar for the first time on it. Even though critics talked trash about Master of Reality, it was another big hit with the fans, and today remains their second highest selling album of all time. It peaked at number 5 on the UK albums chart and number 8 on the US Billboard 200. Not only is it also considered one of the greatest heavy metal albums of all time, music historians often point to it as the first big influence on what would become 3 new genres: doom metal, sludge metal, and even stoner rock. Even though Master of Reality didn't have any major radio hits, standout songs on it include Children of the Grave, Into the Void, and Sweet Leaf. Black Sabbath once again hit the road to promote the album for the rest of the year and into 1972. After their world tour wrapped up, the band took a much-needed break after 3 straight years of the recording and touring cycle. In May, they returned to the studio, and this time Iommi mostly produced. Due to continued heavy drug use, the band, at times, struggled to record. While staying at a mansion in Bel Air, California during recording sessions, they also pulled lots of pranks on each other. One time, after finding Ward naked and passed out after a long night of drinking, his bandmates spray painted him gold from head to toe. Despite the shenanigans, Black Sabbath was able to record their most ambitious record yet. It even featured ballads and instrumentals. Vertigo released Volume 4, their 4th studio album, on September 25th, 1972. Critics once again talked trash about it. It featured the single Tomorrow's Dream, but the song failed to get much radio airplay. Still, fans loved it, and it eventually sold over 1 million copies. Black Sabbath once again toured the world for the rest of 1972 and into 1973, but heavy drug use was really starting to take its toll on the band's endurance, and they ended the tour early. Heck, the drug use now even hurt the band's creativity. When they attempted to write new songs in the summer of 1973, they really struggled. So they took another break and reconvened in a castle in September, this time messing around with synthesizers and coming up with complex song structures. The result is what would become their 5th studio album, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, which Vertigo released on December September 1st, 1973. The extra efforts seem to have paid off. Not only did fans love this album, critics also finally praised it. Although the title track wasn't a big radio hit, today it's considered one of the band's best songs. Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, the album, got up to number 4 on the UK albums chart and number 11 on the US Billboard 200. The band went on another world tour beginning in January 1974. On April 6th, the band played the California Jam Festival. More than 200,000 fans were there to see them in person, while millions more saw them on TV thanks to an ABC broadcast of it. Soon after that, Black Sabbath got a new manager, the quite controversial and infamous Don Arden, aka the quote Al Capone of pop. At one show soon after that, Osbourne got handed a subpoena on stage. As it turns out, signing Arden as the manager broke the terms of their agreement with the previous management. Over the next 2 years, Arden would fight this in courts. The band returned to the studio in February 1975 to record what would become their 6th studio album, Sabotage, released by Vertigo on July 28, 1975. They called it Sabotage since they felt like they were being sabotaged by their former management. And this is also why these new songs were arguably the angriest songs they ever made. Yep, this was a return to their straight-up, heavy, and brutal sound that they had become famous for. The album peaked at number 7 on the UK albums chart and number 28 on the US Billboard 200, but it sold much less than their previous 5 albums. That said, critics once again generally praised it. Standout songs on it include Hole in the Sky and Symptom of the Universe. For the rest of the year, Black Sabbath toured the world to support Sabotage. In January 1976, Vertigo and Warner Brothers released the band's first compilation album, We Sold Our Soul for Rock and Roll, which was a greatest hits collection that ultimately sold more than 2 million copies. After taking a couple months off, the band returned to the studio in the spring of 1976, recording in Miami, Florida, of all places. However, for the first time in their careers, they felt like has-beens, and their creativity once again seemed dried up. Osbourne actually had a mental breakdown at one point. They struggled to finish what would become their 7th studio album, Technical Ecstasy, released by Vertigo on September 25th, 1976. The album got mixed reviews and sold even less than Sabotage. It did feature the fan favorite, Dirty Women, as well as Ward's first lead vocal performance on the song It's Alright. Around this time, Osbourne realized he wanted to leave the band to start a solo career. Still, the band proceeded to tour the world to promote Technical Ecstasy for the rest of the year and first few months of 1977. Later that year, just days before the band was scheduled to return to the studio to record new stuff, Osbourne suddenly quit the band. Shocked, the rest of the band decided to move forward without him, and Iommi called their longtime friend Dave Walker to join them. Walker sang and wrote new material with the band, even appearing on the BBC show Look Here. However, by that time, Osbourne realized he'd made a mistake and wanted back in the band. Iommi, Ward, and Butler welcomed him right back, and 5 months later, they had recorded what would become their 8th studio album, Never Say Die, released by Vertigo on September 29th, 1978. Critics were more harsh of Never Say Die, but it did feature 2 minor hits, Hard Road and the title track. After a world tour to promote Never Say Die, the band returned to Bel Air and rented another house where they once again took way too many drugs and struggled to find a creative spark. When the band did finally come up with new songs, Osbourne often didn't like them and refused to cooperate. There was a point in early 1979 where Osbourne did nothing but drink alcohol. Soon the band and manager Don Arden agreed that he needed to be fired from the band. They chose Ward, who had been closest to Osbourne, to break the news to him on April 27th, 1979. Crazy train enough, soon after that, Ozzy Osbourne started dating Don Arden's daughter, Sharon. The two later got married married and became very famous as a couple, you could say. Ozzy would go on to have an extremely successful solo career during the 1980s. But Black Sabbath also carried on during that time, never getting anywhere close to the success of Osbourne's solo career though. First, they needed a new singer. They found Ronnie James Dio, who had formerly sung in various rock bands, and with him now on vocals, completely changed their sound. Iommi later said, quote, Dio would sing across the riff, whereas Ozzy would follow the riff. Ronnie came in and gave us another angle on writing. After Butler briefly left the band due to personal reasons, eventually Jeff Nichols of the band Quartz replaced him on bass. After Geezer returned to the band, Nichols stuck around but moved to keyboards. Dio and Nichols' first live performance with the band was New Year's Day 1980. By that time, the band had already been recording what would become their 9th studio album, Heaven and Hell, produced by Martin Birch. After yet another prank on Ward, in which his bandmates doused him with a flammable solution, he suffered third-degree burns. Other than that, though, things went well in the studio, and Vertigo released Heaven and Hell on April 18th, 1980. Both critics and fans welcomed Black Sabbath's new, more polished sound. Heaven and Hell was the band's highest-selling album since 1973's Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. It featured the singles Neon Nights, Lady Evil, and Die Young. The band toured for the rest of the year to promote it. For parts of the tour, they played with Blue Oyster Cult, and the record label Polygram later released some of these shows as a concert film. The tour definitely had its drama, though. After a show in Minneapolis on August 18th, Ward suddenly quit the band. Not because of all the pranks, but because he couldn't do it anymore without Ozzy Osbourne, and his drinking had gotten particularly bad. His sudden departure also shocked the band, who scrambled to find a replacement drummer. They ended up finding Vinny Appice to take his place, and we're pretty lucky to find him as he was terrific on drums. At a concert in Milwaukee on October 9th, some fans, frustrated that the band were taking too long to come on stage, started a riot that led to thousands of dollars of damage and 160 arrests. Geezer even got hit by a beer bottle. The chaotic tour finally ended in February 1981, and Black Sabbath returned to the studio to begin recording new material. Martin Birch returned to produce, but they took their time recording this one. Vertigo finally released their 10th studio album, Mob Rules, on November 4th, 1981. Critics mostly trashed this one, but fans stayed loyal. They toured to promote it for most of 1982, but in November, Dio left Black Sabbath to start his own band called Dio. Yeah. And he took Appice with him. The remaining two original members, Iommi and Butler, auditioned several new singers, even considering Robert Plant of Led Zeppelin at one point, but ultimately going with the legendary former Deep Purple vocalist Ian Gillan. In the spring of 1983, Ward had sobered up and rejoined the band on drums, and they recorded what would become their 11th studio album, Born Again, released by Vertigo on September 12, 1983. Despite the name recognition of Gillan, Born Again got mostly negative reviews and barely sold any copies. After its release, Ward quit the band again, mostly saying he couldn't handle the touring anymore. Iommi and Butler recruited former Electric Light Orchestra drummer Bev Bevan to take his place, and the band toured the world to promote Born Again. The tour featured a huge set of the Stonehenge monument, later parodied in the mockumentary This Is Spinal Tap. However, after the tour, Gillan left Black Sabbath to return to his old band, Deep Purple. Bevan didn't stick around either. After taking a brief break in 1984, Iommi and Butler got an obscure singer named David Donato to join the band. Oh, and Ward once again joined on drums. But things just weren't going well. Donato didn't work out on vocals, and Ward quit a third time. Also disillusioned, Butler quit soon after that. At this point, you might be thinking, surely Black Sabbath was done, right? No, they had 8 more albums in them, for crying out loud. Iommi, always the heart and soul of Black Sabbath, assembled a new lineup with vocalist Glenn Hughes, formerly of the band Trapeze, bassist Dave Spitz, formerly of the band Great White, and drummer Eric Singer. Yes, Singer was the drummer, not singer. Oh, and Iommi still had Jeff Nichols on keyboards, so the mostly new lineup recorded a new album, officially Black Sabbath's 12th studio album, Seventh Star, released by Warner Brothers on January 28th, 1986. To be clear, Warner Brothers kept the Black Sabbath name because they figured it would sell more records. But yeah, this record just didn't seem like Black Sabbath. Iommi hated that Warner Brothers still used the Black Sabbath name, later saying, quote, "Glenn Hughes singing in Black Sabbath is like James Brown singing in Metallica." It wasn't gonna work. Still, it did okay commercially, reaching 27 on the UK albums chart. I guess Warner Brothers predicted right. The band was to tour, but a disaster. 4 days before it was supposed to begin, Hughes got in a fight that essentially broke his face. He couldn't sing, and even when the band brought in Ray Gillen to perform in his place, they ended up ending the tour early due to poor ticket sales. In October 1986, Black Sabbath began recording new songs, but Spitz quit the band, and they recruited Bob Daisley to replace him on bass. Daisley had previously performed with Ozzy Osbourne, who by now was way more popular than Black Sabbath ever was. But then Ray Gillen left the band, so they recruited singer Tony Martin to take his place. Fortunately, Martin actually stuck around a few years. Vertigo released their 13th studio album, The Eternal Idol, on November 23rd, 1987. Critics generally trashed it, and it sold so few copies that both Vertigo and Warner Brothers stopped working with them. And yet, Black Sabbath pressed on, still touring and still going through several lineup changes. Spitz returned on bass, then was replaced by Joe Burt, and ultimately Neil Murray. Terry Chimes replaced Eric Singer on drums, but soon he was replaced by Cozy Powell. In 1988, they recorded what would become Black Sabbath's 14th studio album, Headless Cross. IRS Records, a label known for releasing alternative rock stuff, released it on April 24th, 1989. Headless Cross was ignored by critics, and if you were to ask the average rock music fan in 1989 if Black Sabbath was still together, odds are they'd probably answer no. Regardless, Iommi felt just as inspired as ever to create new stuff, and kept at it in the studio, keeping the same lineup together for another record, what would become their 15th studio album, Tear, released by IRS on August 20th, 1990. Black Sabbath also toured to promote it, and then the reunion era has begun. First, Geezer Butler came back on bass after Neil Murray left the band. Then, Ronnie James Dio and Vinny Appice came back after Iommi ditched Martin and Powell got injured, and boom, new life back into this band, I'm telling you. In late 1991 and early 1992, they recorded what would become their 16th studio album, Dehumanizer, released by IRS on June 22nd, 1992. This was their highest selling album since Mob Rules. Critics were more positive of Dehumanizer, and despite everyone in the band now being middle-aged, it was fresh as ever. In addition to the singles TV Crimes and Master of Insanity, Dehumanizer featured the standout song, After All, The Dead. Later that year, Ozzy Osbourne announced he was retiring from music and asked Black Sabbath to open for him for 2 shows. Well, Dio didn't want to do that and ultimately quit the band again the night before the first show. The shows were a success though, with Osbourne and Ward both reuniting with Iommi and Butler for a few Sabbath songs. Vinny Appice left the band after that as well, joining up with Dio as he did solo stuff again. So Iommi and Butler brought back Tony Martin on vocals and recruited former Rainbow drummer Bobby Rondinelli. They recorded what would become Black Sabbath's 17th studio album, Cross Purposes, throughout 1993. IRS released it on January 26, 1994, and they toured to promote it. However, Geezy Butler left the band once again later that year, replaced by Neil Murray once again. Rondinelli left, and Cozy Powell replaced him again, but then Powell left and Rondinelli came back. Oof. In late 1994 and early 1995, the band recorded what most music historians say is the worst Black Sabbath album ever, Forbidden. IRS released it on June 5th, 1995. After the disaster that was Forbidden, Iommi was ready to end Black Sabbath once and for all. But flash forward to the summer of 1997, and he, Geezer Butler, and Ozzy Osbourne had reunited to play shows together as part of Ozzy's wildly popular Ozzfest. After Ozzfest ended, the three kept playing reunion shows, and it felt pretty good to them. In December, Bill Ward joined them, and once again, the original 4 Black Sabbath members were together. Over the next few years, they played several more reunion shows, when finally, in 2001, they found time in the studio to record again, this time with the legendary producer Rick Rubin. However, those sessions kind of fizzled out, and then Ozzy got busy becoming a household name due to the success of MTV's hugely popular reality TV show, The Osbournes, featuring Ozzy, his wife Sharon, as well as their kids. It was a worldwide hit that not only generated new interest in Ozzy's solo career, but Black Sabbath's career as well. In the late aughts, Ozzy and the rest of the original lineup sort of drifted apart again, especially after he sued Iommi over rights to the Black Sabbath name. However, that legal fight ended in 2010, and soon after, the band secretly got back together to jam out and record more new stuff. On November 11th, 2011, they announced they would resume recording a new album with Rick Rubin, and Vertigo would return to release it. However, Ward left the band once again during these sessions, ultimately replaced by drummer Brad Wilk of the band Rage Against the Machine. Vertigo released 13, their 19th and final studio album, on June 7th, 2013. It was the first time the original lineup, well, except for Ward, had released an album together in 35 years. 13 was a critical and commercial success, selling nearly 500,000 copies in a time when people had stopped buying music much anymore. It featured the singles God Is Dead, End of the Beginning, and Loner. In July, the band toured North America for the first time since 2001, with Tommy Clufetos on drums. By the time they toured Europe in 2014, they had planned on releasing a 20th album. However, they ultimately changed their minds and announced one final tour called simply The End. They played their final show on February 4th, 2017 at the Genting Arena in, you guessed it, Birmingham. It had come full circle. On March 7th, the band officially announced that the band was no more. Selling at least 75 million copies worldwide, Black Sabbath is one of the most commercially successful heavy metal bands of all time, and often referred to as the greatest heavy metal band of all time, helping to literally create the genre out of thin air. In addition to their 19 studio albums, Black Sabbath has released 8 live albums, 16 compilation albums, 7 concert films, and 1 EP. Few bands have had so many lineup changes as Black Sabbath. The only constant during their 49 years of existence was Tony Iommi. But even he quit the band briefly, remember? Regardless, they remain one of the most innovative bands to ever exist. More importantly, they remain one of the most influential bands to ever exist. Not just with music, but with literature, television, and movies. Whether you realize it or not, they've influenced you too. Yeah, I got a lot of requests for this one. So which band should I cover next for this series? What's your favorite Black Sabbath song? Mine's probably gotta be the best anti-war song of all time, War Pigs. Anyway, yeah, let me know in the comments and stuff. Oh, and Never Say Die is easily their most underrated album. Hey, I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video.